watching the Cox Channel. The State Chamber of Oklahoma's Business Roundtable, presented by Cox Communications. And now, here's your host, Fred Morgan.
Hello, and welcome to the State Chamber of Oklahoma's Business Roundtable. We have partnered with Cox Communications to tell stories about business and business issues here in Oklahoma. Right now, there's some really hot topics going on in oil and gas industry, and we're lucky to have, as our guest today, Chad Warmington, who is the president of the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. You've been here several times.
And it's always good to be back.
All right. Well, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and your family, and give them a little background.
Sure. So I'm born and raised in Michigan. I moved to Oklahoma, followed a girl, as you do, and 20 years ago, and haven't left yet. So I love Oklahoma. We've got 3 Oklahoma born and raised kids as well. So love being here. And for my hobbies are, I'm in the logistical business. I move children to different events. That's all I really get to do. So I'm a part-time logistical expert. So.
Well, you're also a part-time logistical expert on moving my money into your pocket on the golf course.
That is very true. I excel at that.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background as well. You have a very interesting background, very related to government and politics.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I moved down here to work for Don Nichols, our former U.S. Senator, in 1996, and it was a great opportunity to a kid from Michigan to be in Oklahoma and to be a field rep for him. Got to travel all over the state, learn a lot about the state, meet people from all over the state, and I didn't know it at the time, but those relationships really have continued all the way till today. People that I met back then, I'm still working with today. Eventually went on to work at the Oklahoma House of Representatives for 6 years, did a tour of duty working for you, and have been with the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association for coming up on 4 years. So I've always been involved in government politics and government relations. And so it's kind of what we do, and that's exactly what the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association does as well.
Well, truly, you're probably one of the few people in Oklahoma that have the most knowledge about government and how it works, and so we're lucky to have you here today. So tell us, what is OKOGA, or Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association, and give us an idea of who the membership is.
Sure. The Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association was actually formed back in 1919. It was started by some of the most historic names in the oil and gas industry, and their goal was at the time to help the Allies float to victory on a wave of oil and gas. And so they were very concentrated on that. The effort obviously was successful, and the association kind of grew out of that one singular mission into a more of an interest group for the entire industry. Eventually, they moved it from Tulsa to Washington, D.C., and then the states that were left behind formed their own associations. And so in 1919, Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association became the Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association of Oklahoma. So we've been here since then, and since really the beginning of the oil and gas industry, and our primary focus is representing large active producers. We also represent the largest midstream companies, and we also represent the 4 refiners in the state. So really, from the oil and gas industry perspective, we represent all 3 sectors, but we represent the larger companies in those. And our work is primarily at the Capitol and at the state's regulatory bodies, the Corporation Commission, Department of Environmental Equality, DEQ, so a variety of places where we work to represent them as a whole. We're a smaller association in terms of numbers, but our members are all large companies.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a term that people in the industry know, but maybe our viewers don't know, midstream. What's a midstream company?
Midstream is a pipeline and gathering, flow and gathering operations. So the producers drill the holes, get the product out of the ground, and then you've got to move it, transport it. So our midstream sector covers everybody that's gathering gas off of wells or moving crude oil. to refiners or to gas processing plants. So it's a really robust section of the industry in Oklahoma, and very few people really think about it, but it's a huge part of what makes Oklahoma successful with oil and gas development is that we have the ability to get the product to market.
Right, and Oklahoma has hundreds of pipelines, oil and gas pipelines running across the state, don't they?
We're covered up by pipelines, and I always point that out. I've got a map that shows that when we talk about pipeline safety. I mean, literally Oklahoma is covered with pipelines. And we've got a really good track record on getting that product from point A to point B 99.9% of the time safely, with no truck traffic, no trains, no added pollution emission. And we do it really safely, and I think that's a really testament to why moving product by pipeline is by far the best and most preferred way.
And a lot of these pipelines end up going right into Cushing, Oklahoma from nationally, don't they?
Correct, yeah. Cushing is the pipeline crossroads of America, and really it's one of the most strategic petroleum storage facilities in the entire world. The price for WTI, West Texas Intermediate, is really set at the and based on the inventories that are coming through Cushing, Oklahoma. If you've never been out there, it's an incredible sight to see. There's literally 95 million barrels of oil and gas moving, petroleum products moving in and out of there on a daily basis. It's pretty fascinating, and it's a critical part of our nation's energy infrastructure right in Cushing, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you represent a lot of the big oil companies. These are not just big in the United States, these are multinational companies as well.
Correct, yeah. We've got anything from BP, ExxonMobil, XTO, Marathon, Chevron. So we have those, and then we have the homegrown companies, the Devons and the Chesapeakes, and new homegrown companies, the Newfields and the Cimarexes. And there's a lot of really interesting and exciting activity going on in Western Oklahoma now. We're recruiting a lot more businesses here. Companies like Jones Energy and 4Point and Red Trace and a number of companies that are really looking to invest in Oklahoma and are going to grow and create a good presence here. Those are all active, large, well-capitalized companies that are members of our association.
All right, well, we're going to talk a little bit about those big plays in Oklahoma, and we're going to talk a little bit about long laterals, but we need to take a quick break, and we'll continue our discussion with Chad Warmington of the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association. Come back and join us. Welcome back to our visit with Chad Warmington, the president of the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association. Well, Chad, there's an issue that's been going on at the Capitol here for a little while, but it's an issue in the industry as well. It's referred to sometimes as the long lateral issue. Why don't you describe that for our viewers and talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, it's an issue we've been working on for 4 years, really. This is our 4th year of a pretty intense effort to try to modernize Oklahoma's drilling regulations. In 2011, we passed a bill that was called the Shale Reservoir Development Act. And the Shale Reservoir Development Act is really the single piece of legislation that started this huge uptick of exploration for oil and natural gas in Oklahoma. What it allowed us to do is drill longer horizontal wells beneath the surface in shale formations. And it was a relatively new technology, and we weren't really sure how well it was going to work. But in 2011, we decided to permit it to allow our companies to drill longer than 1 mile in shale, and now we're drilling up to 3 miles in shale on a horizontal well. But we're only limited to shale formations. And as technology has improved over the last 5 years, we've realized that we can really do this in just about any formation in Oklahoma. So we have multiple zones that are off limits for development because of literally one word in statute, which is shale. So it's an effort from the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association, working in conjunction with the coalition of surface and mineral owners, to really modernize this, because mineral owners will absolutely benefit from the passage of this bill. That significant formations that can't be developed economically because of the short laterals, again 1 mile in length versus 2 to 3 miles in length, will be able to be developed. So we're trying to get that legislation passed. We're making pretty good progress this year. We've got a good coalition going, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get it done.
Let's talk a little bit about, there are reservoirs of oil and gas, and then there's shale. Tell our viewers a little bit about the difference. How does that work?
Well, traditionally oil and gas was developed in Oklahoma with vertical wells, and one vertical well could go straight down, tap into the reservoir or the pool of oil or natural gas, and develop it that way. And that's the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. But what we didn't realize was that we could actually go to the source rock, which is the shale, and actually drill through it. Now the difference with a vertical wellbore is only able to develop a small area of the reservoir right around the wellbore. I mean, the hydrocarbons float up to the wellbore and up, but the actual part of the rock that you're in that's the most productive is a pretty small area, versus a horizontal well goes down and drills right through that. So the way that Oklahoma's geography works, it's all kind of layered and stacked formations. Well, once you get that horizontal bit through and into that formation, it's able to stay in the pay zone for 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. So you have much more exposure to the rock. So you combine that technology with hydraulic fracturing, and you've revolutionized oil and gas production in the world, really. And we did a lot of that right here in Oklahoma. So that's the difference. Oil and gas development is now primarily all done by horizontal wells. I think there's 111 rigs running in Oklahoma right now, and I think 3 of them are vertical wells. It's just not productive or economic to be able to drill that way. And frankly, the future of the industry is in horizontal drilling, and particularly long lateral horizontal drilling.
So I know you have legislation at the Capitol this session, and so who's against this? It sounds like a good deal.
Yeah, you know, it's been an interesting group of folks that have been opposed to it. You know, Oklahoma's traditionally developed oil and gas through vertical wells, and so there's a lot of them that are covering up the state. And those small producers have been a little bit uncomfortable with the change of technology. In order to drill long horizontal wells, it's very capital intensive. It's extremely expensive. So small oil and gas producers aren't capitalized well enough to be able to drill those types of wells. So they participate in my company members' wells, but they aren't able to actually operate them and drill them. They've been reticent to allow us to expand beyond shale because of their inability really to participate, and they want to make sure there's protections in place to protect their existing vertical wellbores. We think we address that pretty good in our legislation as best you can, and we also feel like the Corporation Commission does an excellent job of defending those folks. And then, as you know, you always have the right to go to district court if you have, if you feel that there's been some sort of interference with, your asset. So we think there's a lot of protections in place, and we think we've addressed most of the concerns of some of those smaller producers. But the reality is Oklahoma's got to change. I mean, the technology's changed and the industry has changed, and we need to update our statutes. Otherwise, we're going to get left behind when we can do this type of drilling in every one of our surrounding states, but not Oklahoma. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And for a state that's $800 million in the hole, it sure doesn't make a lot of sense to leave all the revenue on the table.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you have sister organizations like the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association in a lot of different states. What are they doing on this issue?
Yeah, it's interesting. Most of our other associations, so Texas and Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, they have long lateral drilling. They don't have the same in non-shale. They can do it in any formation. They don't have those same barriers. So what they're doing is taking advantage of it. Of half the rigs running in the country, running in the Permian Basin in West Texas right now, half of them. Oklahoma has 111. And so, we need to be competitive in order to keep up with it. The Permian Basin is by far the best oil and gas development.
That's in Texas.
It's in Texas and West Texas. And so they have the ability to do it. They have regulatory environment that's very favorable. They have a favorable tax environment, and they have the best rock. So, Oklahoma needs to remain competitive. So I think what they're doing is taking advantage of the fact that we're limiting ourselves. And it again, for a state that's in such dire straits from a revenue perspective, it makes very little sense to prevent us from coming in and spending, literally billions of dollars more developing these formations.
Mm-hmm. The new Trump administration, we may see some developments there. I assume your organization is encouraged by his election and his actions so far.
Absolutely. And I think what President Trump has said is that he's going to let business have a seat at the table. As you've often said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think the oil and gas industry has felt like that over the years, particularly for 8 years of the Obama administration with the EPA in particular. Industry was never given the ability to really participate in the crafting of the regulations or to be able to help them figure out how to best achieve their environmental goals. And I think one of the things we're most encouraged about is Scott Pruitt being at the EPA. And it's not, and I'm going to be clear, it's not that he's going to do what we want him to do. It's just he's going to give us a seat at the table. And we're very good at doing what we do. And for us to be able to help the government, in this case the EPA, protect clean air and clean water is really important, but we also know how to do it if we can be given a seat to be able to help develop those regulations. So again, it's not carte blanche, we're going to do whatever we want. but we're going to be able to be involved in the process. EPA is going to remain within their legal constructs, and I think we're going to have a really successful effort. And as Scott Pruitt says, you can be both pro-economy and pro-environment and pro-energy.
Good, good. Well, we need to take another break, and we'll come back and talk about some other issues with our guest today, Chad Warmington, the president of the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association. Come back. Welcome back to our visit with Chad Warmington, the president of the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association. There are a lot of issues out at the Capitol this year, and one of the things that we're hearing about the industry is that there's a new play in Oklahoma. I guess it's not really a new play, but it's one that's got a lot of momentum. Scoop and stack. What do those stand for, and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, the scoop and the stack are two formations that are primarily in western Oklahoma, west of I-35. The scoop was really the first one that got developed, and Continental Resources and others, Devon Energy, really found the ability, like we talked about before, that they could drill these tight shale formations pretty economically, and they were really very productive wells. The stack kind of came on later as they realized, hey, this works for the scoop. They started looking north into the shale formations and found what they call the stack. And really, the names are really picked by the companies who find them and kind of name them. Stack really stands for Kingfisher and Canadian counties. It's stack formations in Kingfisher and Canadian counties, but it also kind of is, in terms of the stacked formations, there's multiple stacked formations there. But for the scoop and the stack, the state of Oklahoma would be in a real devastating situation in terms of the production of oil and natural gas would be dramatically less than what it is. You know, since we passed the Shale Reservoir Development Act in 2011, we've actually doubled production of oil in the state of Oklahoma. But I also show you a chart. The price has fallen by 2/3. So we're very lucky that we were able to increase production and offset the loss in the commodity price, and that's based largely on the stack and the scoop. In fact, Newfield Energy just announced a record well yesterday that they have drilled in the stack. I mean, these are extremely productive oil wells, and oil is really the name of the game right now. Dry natural gas, which Oklahoma has an abundance of, is really tough to make money because it's such a low commodity price. But for the scoop and the stack, I think Oklahoma would be in a really devastating situation in terms of there would be very few active rigs running here. And everyone likes to compare us to North Dakota. They always say, well, North Dakota's got this higher tax rate and all that, and people are drilling there. Well, North Dakota has 40 rigs running, and we have 111 rigs running. And and that used to be the inverse. They had 200, and we had a little less. But when you have higher taxes, and they have a significantly higher tax base, you don't have as good an infrastructure, and you have a little bit more restrictive regulatory environment, that's what happens. I mean, as you know, capital flees those hostile environments, and the scoop and the stack present some really unique opportunities for them in terms of competition with the Permian Basin in West Texas. So the scoop and the stack, I think, are the two formations that will really help Oklahoma get out of this budget downturn and get back into solid footing. And the reason is that we haven't even really seen the activity pick up like it's going to this year, and next year is when you'll really see the full development.
The companies are just now starting to increase their drilling budgets and really going after that. Well, you're an expert on the state budget. I mean, you've negotiated the state budget before. The State Chamber Research Foundation a few years ago did an economic impact study on what oil and gas industry means for Oklahoma. You might talk a little bit about some of the findings of that and how it plays into the state budget.
Well, I think what's interesting is that Oklahomans are getting bombarded with messages somehow that the oil and gas industry doesn't pay its fair share, which when you look at this, the numbers is really kind of patently false. I mean, 23% of all state taxes are derived from the oil and gas industry. $2.3 billion in 2015 was paid in direct taxes to the state of Oklahoma. It supports 30,000 direct energy jobs, 150,000 indirect jobs. So the industry itself, in terms of its impact to the state of Oklahoma, is massive and is by far probably the single most impactful industry, because it also impacts agriculture and manufacturing and all those other associated industries that work when the oil and gas industry does well. But what's important to remember is it isn't just the production in terms of oil and natural gas.
Right.
It's the activity. It's the rigs running here. That's the real economic benefit to the state. It's nice that we have this long string benefit of gross production tax, But that's not what makes our economy really sing. It's when we have multiple, or in this case, 111 rigs running, and I'm hoping we're over 200, in a year or so. Those are like a small economic little engine. Each and every one of them themselves are a small business. 200 or 300 people per rig are employed coming on and off it at any given time. So when the state does well is when we have drilling rigs running. It's not so much that the production of oil and natural gas, that's a nice added benefit for a long stream, but the economy really does well when we're active drilling and exploring for oil and natural gas.
Right. I mean, you can really see it out in western Oklahoma, but it ripples through the economy. It's not just the tax on the oil and gas that's extracted from the ground. It's the income taxes that are generated by the activity. It's the sales taxes that are generated by the activity. It's all of those, and those all play into the state budget, don't they?
Absolutely. You know, it's when you generate a quarter of the state's income in terms of tax revenue income from one industry, I mean, you can understand how impactful it is. And so a swoon in prices, as we've seen as OPEC ramped up production and really crashed the price, really trying to drive, frankly, our companies out of business. I mean, their goal was to squeeze shale producers because they didn't think we could be competitive. They weren't successful. In fact, what they really made us, and I like to quote Doug Lawler from Chesapeake, who told us 2 years ago, that we're going to have to get really lean and get really efficient. And the one good thing that comes out of a downturn is we get better and we get more efficient. Well, we are. And now we're being able to come back, and we frankly outlasted OPEC, and that's been a good thing. But the state budget is so dependent on that money that any of those peaks and valleys like we go through has a pretty dramatic effect. I think one of the things that you and I have talked about over the years is the state's got to do a better job of either having some more fiscal restraint when we have good times and not spend it all. And I think what you've seen is that Oklahoma has spent all of it when we have it.
Right.
We're not very good about planning for the future. Now we have the mandatory savings fund, the rainy day fund that was created, and that's a good part, but it's not sufficient enough to really handle the wild swings that we have. Right. And just to wrap up on that, so 41% of Oklahomans, when we asked them, we said, who's to blame for this latest crisis? And we asked them about the oil and gas industry and others. 41% of them blamed the legislature for mishandling money when they had it.
Well, we need to take a break. We're going to come back and talk a little bit about your survey that you've conducted. So come back and join us, and we'll talk some more with our guest, Chad Warmington, the president of the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association. Welcome back to our discussion about the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma with our guest, Chad Warmington, the president of the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association. Chad, you have conducted a survey of Oklahoma citizens and their attitudes towards oil and gas industry. What are some of the findings in that survey?
Yeah, we recently conducted a Google survey, and we were able to reach about 1,500 respondents. It was pretty interesting, and we really wanted to know kind of what general Oklahomans thought about the oil and gas industry and this notion that we don't pay enough in taxes and that we're somehow responsible for the state's revenue shortfall. And the results were pretty overwhelming. 41% of the respondents said that the state's revenue shortfall was the result of the state mismanaging state revenue and how they choose to spend state revenue. And I think that's pretty telling that Oklahomans get it. When times get tough, you tighten in your belt. You don't continue on your spending spree. And when times are great, you don't spend it all. I think they pretty clearly see that the state has maybe not done that as well. We asked them also, is the energy industry to blame for not paying enough in taxes? That came in at 9%. And some of the other lower responses were the 2-year price and the price of oil and natural gas or other needed reforms. So, to me, it gave me encouragement that, that Oklahomans understand what's going on here. What you don't do in a budget crisis is you don't go tax the job creators and the wealth creators in the state. And as we all know, you don't tax, you want something more of, and it's just simple, basic economics. And the oil and gas industry already pays its fair share. Again, I said 23% of all state taxes, but we also pay a tax burden that's disproportionately higher than any other industry, frankly, than any of the other members that you have, because on top of all the taxes that they pay, corporate sales tax, all the other things, we pay a severance tax to create our product as well, on top of that, and ad valorem taxes as well for some of the other equipment that we use. So we have a significantly higher tax burden. So this notion that's promoted by some that we don't pay enough is just ludicrous. But the thing that the legislature needs to keep in mind is that any incremental increase in regulations or taxes will affect, where we spend our money, where our companies spend our money. And let me be clear, we're not saying we're going to pack up and move away. That's not what I'm saying. But what will happen is more of that capital will flow to West Texas as opposed to those rigs running here. So you lose out on the top end benefit for maybe a short-term revenue grab. And I think it's very short-sighted for the legislature to consider raising those taxes and putting hardworking Oklahomans out of work.
All right. Well, very interesting discussion. You sound very bullish on the future of oil and gas in the state. We're glad to have you as our guest today, and good luck with the legislative session, and hope you'll come back and join us, and hope you're successful this year.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we thank you for joining us here on the show, and we look forward to seeing you again on our next episode of the Business Roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the State Chamber of Oklahoma's Business Roundtable, presented by Cox Communications. If you have questions about this program, email the Chamber at okstatechamber.com. Set furnishings provided by Scott Rice, creating effective workspace from the floor to the ceiling and everything in between.